The wind in Wyoming doesn't just blow, it screams. It screamed down Main Street in Willow Creek that December, a raw, wounded sound that tore through the cracks in the buildings and into the bones of anyone foolish enough to be outside. Snow didn't fall. It flew sideways like a volley of icy buckshot. Behind the frosted glass of the town's saloons and shops, lanterns flickered, promising a warmth that felt a world away. In an alley tucked between the brick walls of Mallister's saloon, Anna Harlow was trying to become invisible. She pressed herself into the shadows, her arms wrapped so tight around her ribs she could feel each one. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her fingers were stiff, useless things at the end of her hands. The shawl she wore was thin, a pathetic joke against the brutal cold that had made its home deep inside her. 3 days. 3 days since she'd last eaten a real meal. 4 nights since she'd slept in anything that resembled a bed. She'd found corners in stables, shivering next to the dumb, warm bodies of horses. She'd hidden under porches, praying the dawn would come. A gust of wind brought the scent of beef stew from the saloon. It was rich, warm, and cruel. It filled her nose, her head, and the aching, empty pit of her stomach. She clenched her jaw, trying to will the hunger away. But it was a living thing, clawing at her from the inside. This was it. This was the end of the line. She had nothing left to sell, nothing left to trade, except the one thing she'd sworn she never would. The saloon doors burst open, throwing a rectangle of golden light and raucous laughter into the snow. 2 men stumbled out, their breath pluming in the frigid air. One of them, a big man with a cruel face she recognized, paused and squinted into the alley. His name was Amos Kane, and his voice was as thick and ugly as he was. "Well now, what do we have here?" He took a step toward her, his heavy boots crunching in the snow. His shadow fell over her, a suffocating blanket. "A little bird, all alone in the cold." Anna shrank back. The frozen brick scraped against her spine. "Leave me be," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. He grinned, a flash of yellowed teeth in the gloom. "Now that ain't friendly, not at all. I got a nice warm room upstairs, fire's lit, bed's soft." He took another step, closing the distance. "You come on up with me, and I'll make sure you get a hot supper. A fair trade, wouldn't you say?" Her stomach twisted, a war between starvation and revulsion. "I said no." His eyes narrowed, the good humor vanishing, replaced by something mean and sharp. "You sure about that? You got nowhere else to go. Don't you pretend you're better than this. Folks talk. I've heard all about you." He reached out a grimy hand to grab her arm. "Let go," she said louder this time, trying to twist away, but the cold had made her weak. "Don't be stupid," he sneered. "It's a fair trade, a room and a hot meal for a little companionship." "The lady said no." The voice cut through the howling wind like a razor. It was deep, steady, and utterly calm. It held a power that made the air crackle. From the deeper shadows at the mouth of the alley, a man emerged. He was tall, broad-shouldered, a silhouette against the swirling snow. A wide-brimmed hat, dusted with white, concealed most of his face. A long duster coat flapped in the wind, making him seem even larger than he was. As he stepped into the faint light from the saloon, Anna saw it. A scar, a pale, jagged line that ran down his left cheek, from the corner of his eye to the edge of his jaw. It caught the lamplight and seemed to shine. His eyes, fixed on Amos Kane, were the color of a winter sky, steely gray and unwavering. Amos turned, startled. "This ain't your business, or you stranger." "It is now," the man said. His voice didn't rise, didn't threaten. It didn't need to. Amos puffed out his chest, trying to reclaim his swagger. "You don't know who she is. What she is." "I know she's cold," the stranger said, his gaze never leaving Amos. "I know she's hungry, and I know she's being harassed by a man who can't take no for an answer." "You calling me a liar?" "I'm saying you should walk away." The world seemed to hold its breath. The only sound was the wind. Amos's hand twitched, hovering near the pistol holstered at his hip. The stranger didn't move a muscle. He just stood there, a mountain of a man, solid and unyielding. Then Amos sneered and spat into the snow. "She ain't worth a bullet anyway." He shot Anna one last venomous look, then turned and stumbled back into the warmth of the saloon, muttering curses into the storm. Anna sagged against the wall, her legs suddenly threatening to give way. The wave of adrenaline left her shaking even harder than before. The stranger turned to her, his quiet concern a stark contrast to the ugliness that had just passed. "You're not all right," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm fine," she lied, the words tasting like ash. "When's the last time you ate?" She couldn't answer. She just looked away, ashamed. Without another word, he shrugged off his heavy duster coat. The cold must have hit him instantly, but he didn't flinch. He draped it around her shoulders. It was heavy, warm, and smelled of saddle leather, wood smoke, and something else. Something clean, like pine. The warmth spread through her so fast, so intensely, it nearly made her weep. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why are you helping me?" "Because someone should," he said simply. He held out a gloved hand. "Name's Jacob Thornton. I own a ranch a ways out of town." She hesitated before taking his hand. "Anna Harlow." "I know," he said, and her heart sank. "Folks have been talking, but I prefer to watch people for myself. I've seen you in town the last few weeks, seen you trying to find honest work, seen you turn away from men like Amos, more than once." "What's your point?" she asked, suspicious. "My point is, I need someone to cook and clean, to keep the house running. It isn't fancy work, but it's honest. Room, board, and wages." She stared at him, trying to find the trick, the angle. Men like this didn't exist, not in her world. "What's the catch?" "No catch," he said, his steely eyes meeting hers. "Just work, and maybe a chance to start over." The snow fell silently in the space between them. Anna clutched the heavy coat tighter. A chance. The word was so foreign she could barely comprehend it. She had stopped believing in chances a long time ago. "You trust strangers that easily?" she asked, her voice tight. "Not usually," Jacob replied, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "But you don't strike me as the kind of woman who lies about the shape she's in. You're hungry." The simple, direct statement broke through her defenses. "Yes," she whispered, the admission a painful surrender. "I am." "Then let's get you fed." He gestured toward a sturdy wagon parked at the end of the street, almost hidden by the storm. He guided her toward it, his hand hovering near her back but not touching, giving her space. She hesitated for one last second at the wagon's edge, glancing back at the dim, hazy light of the saloon. One path led to a warm room and certain shame. The other, the other led into a storm with a scarred stranger, to a place she didn't know, to a future that was a complete blank. She had traded her pride for survival more times than she could count. But something told her, as she climbed onto that wagon, that this time she might be trading it for something more. She just couldn't tell if it was hope or a different kind of danger. The wagon wheels crunched over the frozen ground, the sound muffled by the thickening snow. Anna sat beside Jacob Thornton, clutching his coat around her, a small island of warmth in the vast, freezing darkness. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncertain. She kept glancing at him from the corner of her eye. His jaw was set, his hands firm on the reins, his focus entirely on the barely visible trail ahead. Snow gathered on the brim of his hat, turning him into a phantom, driving them into oblivion. He hadn't said a word since they'd left town. "How far is your ranch?" she finally asked, her voice small against the wind. 2 hours in good weather," he answered without looking at her. "Might take longer tonight." The horses snorted, their breath rising in thick, ghostly clouds. She rubbed her stiff fingers together inside the coat's deep pockets, trying to work some life back into them. Her mind was racing. Who was this man? Why was he doing this? Men, in her experience, never did anything for free. There was always a price, and it was usually paid in a bedroom. "Do you live alone?" she asked, the question hanging in the air. "For a while now." "No wife?" "No." His answers were short, clipped, but not unkind. Just final. They offered no purchase for more questions, no invitation for conversation. Still, she couldn't let it go. The fear, the deep-seated distrust, wouldn't allow her to relax. "What kind of work exactly?" she pressed. "What do you need done?" Cook, clean, keep the place from falling down around my ears, that's all. That's all, she repeated, incredulous. That's all, he confirmed. She studied his profile in the faint, silvery light reflected off the snow. The harsh line of his jaw, the straight nose, the unreadable expression. There was no hunger in his gaze when he glanced at her, no slick charm in his words, just a quiet, unnerving steadiness. It unsettled her more than Amos Kane's open lechery ever could. Cruelty, she understood. This quiet decency? It felt like a trap. You said you have a ranch, she said, trying another angle. Is it big? Bigger than most, he admitted. My grandfather started it. My father built it up. I'm just trying to hold it together. The silence returned, but this time it felt different. He had offered a piece of himself, a small crack in the stoic facade. She looked out at the vast, rolling emptiness around them. Endless snowy hills, the skeletal shapes of bare trees, and far in the distance, the colossal, jagged shadows of mountains standing watch. I didn't expect so much space, she murmured, almost to herself. Most folks don't, he said. Wyoming's got plenty of it, plenty of room to get lost or to find yourself. They crested a ridge and the land suddenly fell away below them. There it was, the Thornton Ranch. A two-story house with a long, slanted porch stood as the anchor, smoke curling faintly from its stone chimney, a brave signal against the storm. A large barn, leaning slightly as if weary from fighting the wind, stood nearby, along with several other snow-covered outbuildings. It looked lonely, isolated, a world unto itself. That's yours? She asked, a note of awe in her voice. Jacob just nodded. Needs work, but it's solid. He pulled the wagon right up to the porch and jumped down with an easy grace. When he reached up to help her down, his hand was warm and steady on her arm. She flinched instinctively, pulling back. He immediately let go, stepping back to give her room, his face unreadable. He hadn't missed the gesture. Inside, the house was cold, but it wasn't the dead empty cold of an abandoned place. Dust motes danced in the lantern light he lit, and the furniture was worn and masculine. But there were signs of life. A pair of scuffed boots by the door, a stack of books on a small table, a quilt folded neatly over the back of a worn leather chair. It was a house that was lived in, not just occupied. Your room's upstairs, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet house. Second door on the right. She climbed the creaking stairs slowly, her legs aching. The room was small, but it was clean. A simple bed with a sturdy wooden frame, a wooden chest for her belongings, if she had any, and a single window looking out toward the mountains. A handmade quilt, its colors faded into soft, muted tones of blue and gray, covered the bed. Anna sat on the edge of the mattress, running her fingers over the intricate stitching. It felt soft, cared for. It had been so long, so terribly long, since she'd had a room with a door she could close, a place that was hers, even for a night. Downstairs she heard the crackle of a fire catching in the hearth. The rich, dark scent of coffee soon followed. When she finally ventured back down, Jacob was standing by the fireplace, a mug in his hand. He gestured to the kitchen table. He'd laid out a simple meal, thick slices of bread, a crock of butter, and cold ham. It was a feast. He handed her a steaming mug of coffee and slid the plate across the table. Her hands trembled as she took the mug, the warmth seeping into her skin, almost painful in its intensity. You didn't have to do this, she said, her voice thick. Maybe not, he replied, taking a seat opposite her. But I wanted to. They ate in silence. It wasn't the tense, uneasy silence from the wagon. It was a comfortable quiet, filled only by the crackling of the fire and the howling of the wind outside. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she ate a meal without feeling like she had to guard it, without feeling like she had to earn it with something other than her presence. Afterward, Jacob leaned back in his chair, his gray eyes studying her. There's something I should say. Anna's spine tensed. Here it comes, she thought. The price. Folks in town will talk, he said, his voice low and even, about you being here, about me being a bachelor. They'll whisper, she finished for him, her voice flat. They'll say I'm trading favors for shelter. She swallowed, the food sitting heavy in her stomach now. They already do. He met her eyes directly, and there was no pity in them, only a frank honesty. Whatever they say, it doesn't change anything in this house. This is your home now, for as long as you want it. Home. The word struck her like a physical blow. It was a concept so foreign, so lost to her, that it rang in her ears like a long-forgotten bell. She looked down at her hands, unable to meet his gaze. "You don't know me," she whispered. "You don't know what I've done, what might follow me here." Jacob's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of conviction. "I don't need to. I know you needed help. I know you said yes to an honest job when you could have taken the easy road in that alley. For now, that's enough." The wind rattled the windows, a lonely, desolate sound. But inside, in the warm firelit kitchen of a scarred stranger's house, Anna felt something stir deep in her chest. It was a fragile, fluttering thing she hadn't felt in years. It might have been hope, but as she lay in bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar groans of the old house, another thought crept in, cold and sharp as an icicle. This kindness, this sanctuary, it felt too good to be true. And in her life, things that seemed too good to be true always were. There was always a catch, and she had a terrible feeling she just hadn't found it yet. Life on the Thornton Ranch settled into a strange, quiet rhythm. Each morning Anna rose before the sun, the air in her small room so cold it hurt to breathe. She'd light the stove in the kitchen, its iron belly a grumpy beast that had to be coaxed to life. She swept the wide plank floors, washed the few dishes, and attempted to make simple meals. Porridge, boiled eggs, strong black coffee. She was not a good cook. On the third morning she was trying to fry bacon. The pan hissed and spat hot grease at her. Startled, she jumped back, her sleeve brushing against the stove's scorching edge. In an instant, the cheap cotton went up in a whoosh of flame. She screamed, a raw sound of panic, stumbling backward and tripping over a loose floorboard. The kitchen door slammed open so hard it hit the wall. Jacob ran in, his face a mask of alarm. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the heavy water bucket from the hearth and doused her arm, the fire, and half the kitchen floor. The flames sputtered and died, leaving her soaked, shivering, and humiliated on the wet floorboards. I'm sorry," she whispered, her breath coming in ragged, shaky gasps. "I can't even cook a simple breakfast." She waited for the anger, the shouting, the dismissal. It was what she knew. Instead, Jacob crouched beside her, his voice low and calm. "You're learning. That stove's got a temper. Just takes time to get to know it." He handed her a dry towel from a hook on the wall. There was no scolding, no judgment in his eyes. Only a quiet concern that was somehow harder to bear. For the next hour, he didn't just clean up the mess. He showed her how to read the flames, how to adjust the dampers, how to find the stove's hot spots and its cooler edges. His voice was calm, his large, capable hands steady as he guided hers. Anna found herself watching him, not just the lesson. She watched the way he moved, the deliberate, respectful way he spoke. He treated her with a patience that unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. It was a language she didn't speak. That night when she went up to her room, she found a bundle wrapped in brown paper sitting on top of her quilt. Inside were 2 new pairs of thick woolen stockings, a shawl much heavier and warmer than her own, and a small, folded note. The handwriting was strong and simple. "Thought you might need these with the cold coming in." It was just the beginning. A few days later, when the sugar ran out, she found a large jar of honey tucked neatly in the back of the pantry. He never mentioned it. On a small table near the window, a stack of books had appeared. Worn novels, a slim volume of poetry, and a travel journal with pressed, faded flowers tucked between the pages. He never said a word about them either, but each quiet offering spoke volumes. He thanked her after every single meal, even the ones she nearly burned. He always wiped his muddy boots clean on the mat before stepping inside. He was a man of quiet habits, of unspoken respect. Without her asking, he fixed the squeaky stair that she always tried to avoid on her way up to bed. He oiled the loose hinge on her window that rattled in the wind. He mended the broken drawer in the kitchen that had snagged her apron. He was watching her, not in a predatory way, but in a way that saw what she needed before she even knew it herself. It was terrifying. One evening after supper, a restless energy drove her out of the house and toward the barn. The air was crisp and cold, the sky a tapestry of stars so bright they looked like holes punched in black velvet. Inside the barn, the air was warm and smelled of hay and animals. A single lantern cast long, dancing shadows. She found Jacob kneeling in the hay beside a newborn calf, gently wrapping its leg in a salve-soaked cloth. "You're good with them," she said softly from the doorway. He glanced up, his face softened by the lantern light. "Animals don't lie," he said, his voice low and gentle as he stroked the calf's neck. "They tell you what they need, and they don't judge you for what you can't give." She took a step closer, drawn by something in the quiet scene. The way he spoke to the animal, the kindness in his touch, made something in her chest tighten. She had never known gentleness could look like this. It had always been a mask for something else, a prelude to a demand. But this felt real. It felt safe, and safety was the most dangerous feeling of all. It made you lower your guard. Later that week, she was dusting the parlor, a room he rarely used. It felt like a shrine to a life that had ended. Behind a row of leather-bound books on the mantel, she found a photograph in a silver frame, turned to face the wall. Curiosity got the better of her. She picked it up. It was a picture of a young woman with bright, laughing eyes and a cascade of dark curls. She was leaning into a younger Jacob, a Jacob without the scar, without the hardness in his eyes. They were both smiling, a brilliant, unburdened smile, the kind people have when they believe the world will always be kind to them. She was breathtakingly beautiful. Her name was Laura. Jacob's voice from the doorway made her jump. She turned quickly, the frame clutched in her hand, her face flushing with guilt. "I'm so sorry. I wasn't trying to pry." "It's all right," he said, his face an unreadable mask as he stepped into the room. "I put it there so I wouldn't have to see it every day, but I couldn't bring myself to hide her away completely." "She was beautiful," Anna whispered, her throat tight. "She was," he said quietly, taking the photograph from her hands. His fingers brushed hers, and a strange jolt, like lightning, shot up her arm. He stared down at the image, his expression distant. "We were supposed to be married. She died the winter before last. A fever." Anna said nothing. There was nothing to say to a grief that vast, that quiet. He looked up from the photo, his eyes meeting hers. "She believed in second chances," he added, his voice barely a whisper. "She always said no one should be judged by their worst mistake or their worst day." Anna studied him then, really studied him. The scar that sliced through his handsome features, the steadfastness in his gaze, the profound lonely grief that lived behind his eyes. He wasn't just a kind man. He was a man who had been broken and had somehow put himself back together, piece by piece. "She must have loved you very deeply," Anna said. "She did," he affirmed, placing the photograph back on the mantel. But this time, he left it facing out. "And I think she would have liked you." The words landed like a tremor deep inside Anna's chest. She wanted to believe him. She wanted, with a desperation that frightened her, to believe that someone like her, broken, running, with a past full of shadows, could be known, truly known, and still be wanted. That night when she went upstairs, she didn't feel like a trespasser anymore. She felt invited. She felt the first fragile seed of belonging begin to take root in the barren soil of her heart. But as she drifted to sleep, a cold thought slithered into her mind. Fevers were common, but the woman in that photograph, so full of life and light. It was hard to imagine a simple fever taking her. It felt too simple, too neat. And the man who had turned her picture to the wall, was he hiding from his grief, or was he hiding something else entirely? The morning sun glinted off the snow-covered fields, a brilliant, blinding light. But the cold still bit, sharp and unforgiving. Anna was drying the last of the breakfast dishes when she heard the crunch of wagon wheels in the yard. She glanced out the window and saw Jacob returning from his trip to town. One look at his face, shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, told her everything. There was a tightness in his shoulders, a grim set to his jaw. She recognized it instantly. Trouble. He stepped inside, stomping the snow from his boots with more force than necessary. "We need to talk," he said, his voice quiet, but laced with a new tension. Anna set the towel down slowly, her stomach twisting into a cold knot. "What is it?" "A man's been asking questions in town. Well-dressed. Calls himself Victor Harlow." Her breath caught in her throat. The name was a key turning a rusty lock in the deepest, darkest part of her soul. The part she had tried so hard to wall off. "Said he's your brother," Jacob finished. She turned away, gripping the cold edge of the sink, her knuckles white. "He found me." "He didn't sound like a concerned family man," Jacob said, his voice hard. "Bill over at the general store said the man was slick. Asking questions, wanting to know if anyone had seen a woman matching your description. Said there was some family business that needed resolving." Anna remained silent for a long moment, her mind racing back through a life she had run from. The silks, the parties, the whispers in hallways, the suffocating hypocrisy of it all. "He's not here because he misses me," she said finally, her voice cold and brittle. "Victor never does a single thing that doesn't serve him." Jacob crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe, his gray eyes watchful. "What does he want?" She took a deep breath, the confession feeling like poison on her tongue. "To silence me." Jacob's brow furrowed, but he didn't interrupt. He just waited. "3 years ago," she began, the words coming out in a rush, "Victor was courting the daughter of one of my father's business partners. Her name was Emily. She was only 17, a sweet girl, naive. She trusted him completely." Her voice grew quieter, laced with a shame that wasn't hers. "One night, something happened. He hurt her, took advantage of her trust. The next morning, her entire family was gone. They just packed up and left town. No explanation, no goodbye. Just gone." She finally turned to meet Jacob's gaze, her own eyes burning with an old fury. "But I saw the bruises on her wrist when she said goodbye to me. I saw the terror in her eyes. I knew what he'd done. I told our father," she continued, her voice shaking with the memory of the betrayal. "But Victor had already gotten to him. He spun this web of lies, said Emily was hysterical, unstable. He convinced our father that I was making it all up, that I was just trying to sabotage his engagement out of jealousy. And my father chose to believe him. He always chooses to believe him." Jacob's jaw was a hard, clenched line. "And now?" "And now Victor's on the verge of a massive business deal that will make him one of the most powerful men in the territory, a deal that requires a flawless reputation. He knows that if I were to speak to the right people, judges, his new business partners, their wives, his entire world would crumble. He's not here to bring me home, Jacob. He's here to make sure I never talk." Jacob nodded slowly, a dark understanding in his eyes. "Then he'll find me standing in his way." Anna looked at him, her heart tightening with a fear that was suddenly for him, not for herself. "I don't want you caught in this. You don't know him. He's ruthless." "I'm already in it," he said simply. They were still standing there, locked in that tense moment, when the sound of a lone horse broke the morning quiet. Anna rushed to the window, her heart pounding against her ribs. A single rider was approaching the house. His coat was immaculate black wool, his posture too perfect, too practiced. Even from a distance, she recognized the arrogant way he held his head. Victor Harlow. He dismounted smoothly, tying his expensive horse to the porch rail with a practiced flick of the wrist. He looked up at the house, a smug, assessing expression on his handsome face. He looked at it like he already owned it. Jacob moved toward the door, his hand instinctively going to the pistol she knew he sometimes wore at his hip. Anna stopped him, her hand on his arm. "Let me talk to him." "I'll be right behind you," he said, his voice a low growl. They stepped onto the porch together, the cold air a sudden shock. Victor's perfectly composed smile faltered for a fraction of a second when he saw Jacob standing beside her, solid and imposing. "Well, well," Victor said, his voice a silken purr that always made her skin crawl. "There you are, little sister. You've certainly made yourself at home." He gestured vaguely at the rustic house, a flicker of distaste in his eyes. I must say, I expected something far less civilized, but this is almost respectable. What do you want, Victor? Anna asked, her voice steady. To bring you home, of course, he said, oozing false concern. Father has been beside himself with worry. Father disowned me, she shot back. Or did you forget that part? Victor's smile tightened at the edges. That was before he heard your side of the story. A misunderstanding. I'm sure if you just came back, made amends. I am not going back with you. Victor's gaze flicked to Jacob, dismissing him as nothing more than a piece of scenery. And I suppose this rancher has something to do with your sudden defiance? Jacob stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Anna. She's not property. She makes her own choices. Victor's expression hardened, the charming facade cracking. You think she told you the truth? This man? He asked Anna, his tone dripping with condescension. You think she's some poor wronged girl just trying to survive? He laughed, a short, ugly sound. Ask her what she did in Laramie. Ask her about the scandal with Jonathan Webb, a married man. Anna's stomach turned to ice. It was an old lie, another one of Victor's twists. A kind man who had offered her a job, whose wife later accused her of impropriety when Victor whispered poison in her ear. That is not your story to twist, she snapped. Oh, but it is, Victor said smoothly, turning his venom back on her. You see, it's always your word against mine, dear sister. And you're already a woman running from one mess. How many more scandals will it take before this man here, he nodded at Jacob, realizes what you really are? Jacob's voice was calm but edged with steel. She owes you nothing. You are not welcome here. Victor's gaze sharpened, a flicker of genuine malice in his eyes. Be careful, Thornton. You step into family business, you're liable to get hurt. You think this ends with a simple warning? I always finish what I start. Then start walking, Jacob said, his voice flat and final. Victor's eyes lingered on Anna, a flash of something cold and dangerous passing between them. A promise. This isn't over, he hissed. He turned without another word, mounted his horse with fluid grace, and rode away, the wind swallowing the sound of his horse's hooves. Anna stood frozen on the porch, her heart racing. The cold she felt had nothing to do with the weather. He's not done, she whispered. Jacob placed a steady, warm hand on the small of her back. Neither are we. But as she looked at Jacob, at the hard line of his jaw and the fury in his eyes, she saw something else. When Victor had said the name Thornton, there had been a flicker of recognition in his eyes. And when Jacob had stared back, it wasn't just the anger of a man defending a guest. It was something older, something deeper. These two men, she realized with a sickening lurch, knew each other, and their story didn't start with her. The wind had died, but the silence it left behind was heavier, charged with unspoken history. The cold seemed to cut even deeper now. 2 days passed in a state of siege. Jacob was quiet, watchful. He spent hours on the porch, rifle across his lap, just staring out at the snow-covered hills. He was waiting, and the waiting was unraveling Anna's nerves. On the third morning they came. Victor didn't ride alone this time. He approached the house with 2 other men, their faces hard and unfamiliar. He wasn't on his fine horse. He was in a buggy, as if he were here on official business. He stopped at the edge of the yard, and the way he stood there, radiating confidence, made Anna's blood run cold. He was holding a folded piece of paper in one gloved hand. Jacob and Anna stepped onto the porch to meet him. Jacob moved with a coiled tension, like a wolf ready to spring. Victor didn't even look at Jacob. His eyes were locked on Anna, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He raised the paper. Anna Harlow, he declared, his voice carrying in the still morning air. By the authority of Sheriff Miller from Willow Creek, I am placing you under arrest for the theft of $200 from your father's store. Jacob's voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. Let me see the warrant. Victor's smug smile widened. This is family business, Thornton. I suggest you stay out of it before you're charged with obstruction. Jacob didn't move a muscle. He just held out his hand. The warrant. With a theatrical sigh, Victor slid the paper back into his coat pocket. The sheriff will sort out the details once she's been returned to his custody. My men here are deputized to ensure she complies. I didn't steal anything, Anna cried, the accusation absurd and terrifying. Victor spread his hands in a gesture of false sympathy. You vanished on the very same night the money went missing from the cash box. People will draw their own conclusions. It's a tragic story, really. You forged that document, Anna said, her voice shaking with rage. I don't need to forge anything, little sister, Victor said coolly. People just need a reason to question your character. It isn't hard to provide one. Just ask Samuel Reed in Cheyenne. Remember him? Anna stiffened. Samuel Reed. Another man Victor had ruined. He'd twisted a business disagreement into accusations of fraud, destroying Reed's reputation with nothing but whispers and innuendo. Victor saw the flicker of fear in her eyes and turned his attention to Jacob. Did she tell you about him, or the dozen others? You see, Thornton, she has a pattern of taking what isn't hers and then crying victim when she's caught. Money, attention, other women's husbands. That's enough, Anna snapped. Victor's smirk deepened. She took their money, their kindness, their little gifts, until they asked for the one thing she wouldn't give. But she kept the gifts, just like she kept our father's money. He paused, letting the poison sink in. It's a pattern, and it always ends with her running. Leave, Jacob said, his voice a low growl as he took a step forward. Victor's hand moved like a snake striking. It was too fast. In a blink, a small silver pistol was in his hand, aimed not at Jacob, but squarely at Anna's chest. She's coming with me, he snarled, all pretense of civility gone. In the buggy or in a pine box? Your choice. Time seemed to slow down. The world narrowed to the dark, round hole at the end of that barrel. Then Jacob moved. He didn't go for his own gun. He launched himself forward, a blur of motion, tackling Victor with the force of a grizzly. They hit the ground hard, the pistol flying from Victor's grasp and skidding into a snowbank near the porch steps. They rolled and grappled in the snow, a chaotic explosion of violence. Victor's men started forward, but Jacob was a whirlwind of fury, landing a hard right that sent Victor's head snapping back. But Victor was wiry and quick. He twisted, yanking a wicked-looking blade from a sheath in his boot. He slashed upward. Jacob cried out, a sharp gasp of pain, as the knife laid open his forearm. Blood, shockingly red, soaked his sleeve and spattered the pure white snow. Stop! Anna screamed. She saw the pistol, half buried in the snow. Without thinking, she dove for it, her fingers closing around the freezing metal. She scrambled back to her feet, leveling the gun with two shaking hands. Victor had Jacob pinned, the blade of the knife hovering just above his throat. Let him go, Victor, she shouted, her voice raw. He froze, his chest heaving, his eyes wild. He glanced at her, then at the gun. A sneer twisted his lips. You don't have the nerve. Try me, Anna said, the words coming from a place of pure, cold rage she didn't know she possessed. The shaking in her hands stopped. The world came into sharp focus. One more move, and I end this right here. The standoff was absolute. Jacob bleeding, Victor poised to kill, and Anna with the power of life and death in her hands. In that moment of hesitation, Jacob seized his chance. With a powerful roar, he bucked upward, shoving Victor off him. They rolled apart, both scrambling to their feet, blood painting the snow in a grim mosaic. Victor stood panting, his eyes darting from Jacob to Anna, who still held the gun steady. This changes nothing, he hissed. You can't prove a thing. I don't have to, Anna said, her voice ringing with newfound strength. Because I know what you've done. I remember everything. The missing funds from the shipping company, the forged contracts with the railroad, the grazing land you stole in Father's name from the Millers. I watched you, Victor. I saw it all. Every dirty deal you thought no one was smart enough to notice. Victor went pale. You're bluffing. Am I? She challenged. I remember the account numbers. I remember the names. She took a step forward. No one will believe you. You're a runaway, a thief with a ruined name. I believe her, Jacob said, now on his feet, clutching his bleeding arm. He moved to stand beside Anna, his presence a solid wall of support. He looked Victor dead in the eye. You came after a girl like Emily. You used her trust, and then you broke her. That makes you a predator. Then you come here, and you try to use this woman's past against her. That makes you a coward." He took a step, shielding Anna with his body. "You don't get to define her. Not anymore." Something inside Anna locked into place. All the fear, all the shame, all the years of running coalesced into a single point of unshakable resolve. "Leave," she said, her voice low and dangerous. Victor hesitated, his calculating eyes weighing his options. He looked toward his men, who were watching uncertainly, then back at the unwavering gun in Anna's hand and the fury in Jacob's eyes. "If you ever come near me or him again," Anna said, "I will tell everyone everything. And this time, I won't be alone." Victor's lips curled into a final hateful sneer. "You'll regret this." "No," she said, the word a promise to herself. "Not anymore." He took a step back, brushed the snow from his expensive coat with a flick of his wrist, and turned. Without another word, he climbed into his buggy, and with a sharp crack of the reins, disappeared down the trail, his hired men following like shadows. Anna finally lowered the gun, her breath coming out in a ragged, uneven sob. Her entire body began to shake. Jacob looked at her, then down at his arm. "You're shaking." "You're bleeding," she replied, her voice choked. He gave a faint, pained grin. "You should see the other guy." She let out a laugh then, a raw, shaky, broken sound. But it was real, and for the first time in her adult life, she felt tall. Not because of the weapon she had held, but because for the first time, someone had stood beside her and made her believe she was worth fighting for. The fight wasn't over. She knew that. This was just the beginning. The snow had begun to melt around the edges of the Thornton Ranch, revealing muddy, wounded patches of earth. But inside the house, the air felt heavier and colder than any winter storm. Jacob's arm was bound tightly. The bleeding stopped, but the attack had left a dark cloud over them. They were no longer just hiding. They were at war. A knock came at the door just after sunrise a few days later. Not the sharp, aggressive rap of an enemy, but the hesitant knock of a delivery boy from town. Jacob stepped outside and returned with a yellow telegram. The moment Anna saw his face as he read it, the dread that had been coiling in her gut tightened its grip. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He wordlessly handed her the flimsy paper. Her eyes scanned the stark, typed words, and the blood drained from her face. It was from the sheriff's office in Cheyenne, the territorial capital. Victor had filed formal charges, but he'd changed the story. He now claimed she had stolen $500, more than double the original amount, an amount that elevated the crime from a misdemeanor to a serious felony. And worse, 3 witnesses had signed sworn affidavits, claiming to have seen her take the money from her father's safe. Anna sank onto a chair, the telegram trembling in her hand. "He's escalating," she said, her voice hollow. "He knows I'm not running anymore, so now he's trying to bury me." Jacob crouched beside her, his good hand covering hers. "He's bluffing. These witnesses, they're not real," she whispered, shaking her head. "They're bought. He's building a noose with forged rope and daring anyone to call it false. And with my reputation, with the whispers he's already spread, people are going to believe it. A disgraced daughter stealing from her wealthy family, it's the perfect story." "We'll fight it." "With what?" she cried, the despair finally breaking through. "Victor has money, lawyers, connections. I have a past people whisper about and a brother who wants to see me hang. All I have is the truth, and right now, that's not worth a damn thing." "You have me," Jacob said, his voice a low, steady anchor in her storm. She shook her head, pulling her hand away. "I can't let you. Look at your arm. Look at what this has already cost you. If he drags you into this in a courtroom, he will ruin you too. He'll dig into your past. He'll twist everything. He'll destroy this ranch, your name, everything you've worked for." Jacob stood up slowly. He took her hands in his, forcing her to look at him. His gray eyes were clear and deep, and in them she saw something that stole her breath. "I love you." The words came without hesitation, quiet, simple, and powerful. They hung in the air between them, more real than the threat from Cheyenne. more solid than the walls of the house. I didn't expect it, he continued, his voice soft. Didn't even want it, if I'm being honest. But it's the truth. I love you, Anna Harlow. Tears, hot and stinging, filled her eyes. You can't, she choked out. You don't know me. He smiled faintly, a sad, gentle curve of his lips. Too late for that. She looked away, unable to bear the sincerity in his gaze. If you knew everything, everything about me, the things I've done, the things I've had to do to survive, you wouldn't say that. I know enough, he said, his grip on her hands tightening slightly. I know you are brave. I know you are kind. I know you cook better than I do, even if the stove hates you. A flicker of humor. And I know that this house, this empty, quiet house, it became a home the day you walked through the door. Her breath hitched. For one wild, impossible moment, she let herself believe him. She let herself believe that it was possible to be seen, truly seen, with all her flaws and all her scars, and still be loved. The moment was shattered by the pounding of hooves and the crunch of heavy boots in the melting snow. This was no lone delivery boy. Jacob moved quickly to the door, his body instantly shifting into a defensive posture. He opened it just enough to see out. Sheriff Miller stood on the porch. He wasn't alone. He had two deputies with him, their hands resting ominously on the butts of their pistols. All three men looked solemn and determined. The sheriff held a folded paper in one hand. It was not a telegram. Miss Harlow, he said, his voice flat and official, I'm afraid I have to take you into custody. Anna stepped forward, her chin lifted, the last vestiges of hope turning to cold, hard defiance. On what charges? Theft and fraud, Miller said, avoiding her eyes. And now, fleeing prosecution. I have a warrant here, signed by the territorial judge himself. Jacob stepped between them, a solid, immovable barrier. Let me see it. The sheriff handed it over. Jacob's eyes scanned the lines, his brow furrowed in a deep, angry line. This says $500. The last I heard, it was $200. New evidence came to light, the sheriff said, his voice rote, as if reading from a script. Apparently, Miss Harlow's crime was more extensive than first believed. Anna's hands balled into fists at her sides. That is a lie. Then you can prove it in Cheyenne, the sheriff said, his patience clearly wearing thin. But for now, you'll have to come with me. Jacob's voice was dangerously calm. She has the right to contact a judge directly, before you take her anywhere. Sheriff Miller hesitated. Technically, yes, but Anna's mind raced. A judge. The right judge. Judge Whitaker, she said, her voice urgent. In Cheyenne. He's a friend of my father's. His niece was Emily. Jacob's eyes widened in understanding. The girl Victor heard. Anna nodded. He will listen. He has to. Jacob turned back to the sheriff. Let us send one telegram. To Judge Whitaker. That's all we ask. Give her that one chance. The sheriff sighed, a long, weary sound. He looked at Anna's defiant face, then at Jacob's unwavering stare. Fine, he conceded, but I can't wait long. You have until tomorrow morning. Then she comes with me, telegram or no. I'll ride into town myself, Jacob said immediately. I'll send it within the hour. As Jacob prepared his horse, Anna stood on the porch, the two deputies watching her every move. The world had shrunk to this small patch of land. This one last, desperate hope. What if he doesn't answer? She asked Jacob as he swung into the saddle. He leaned down, his face close to hers. Then we'll figure out what comes next, together. She nodded, then stepped forward and pressed her hand to his chest over his heart. You meant what you said? She whispered. He looked down at her, his love a tangible thing in the cold morning air. Every word. Then he turned the horse and rode toward town, the fate of her entire world burning a hole in his coat pocket. A simple message, a plea for justice sent out into the wire. Investigate Victor Harlow. Ask about Emily Rollins. Truth matters more than blood. It was a shot in the dark. And they both knew, if it missed, there wouldn't be another. The morning air was unnaturally still, the sky a pale, washed-out gray. Jacob stood on the porch, a yellow telegram in his hand. He'd been standing there since the writer had dropped it off at dawn, just reading it over and over. Anna had been at the kitchen table all night, waiting, her body numb with exhaustion and dread. She hadn't been able to sleep. She hadn't even been able to think. Finally, he stepped back inside, the floorboards creaking under his weight. He looked up, and his face was grim, unreadable. Anna's heart plummeted. "Well?" she asked, her voice a rough croak. He didn't speak. He just held out the telegram. Her hands shook so badly she could barely unfold the paper. It was from Judge Whitaker's clerk. Victor Harlow, under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and possible involvement in the death of Emily Rollins. Federal inquiry underway. Charges against Anna Harlow under review. Federal marshal en route to your location. Hold position. Do not engage with local authorities. J. Whitaker. Anna stared at the words, her breath catching in her throat. The letters blurred through her tears. Death of Emily Rollins. Not just assault. Death. The bruises she'd seen, they were just the surface of a much darker, more horrible secret. He believed me, she whispered, sinking back into her chair. Jacob knelt beside her, his hand warm on her shoulder. Of course he did. The truth was always on your side. Then maybe I have a chance. You always did, he said softly. By midday, a new rider approached. Not Sheriff Miller, but a tall, imposing man in a dark coat, his face weathered and serious. He moved with an unhurried confidence that spoke of absolute authority. 2 deputies flanked him, but they remained outside as he stepped onto the porch, a worn notebook in his hand. "Miss Harlow," he said, tipping his hat. It wasn't a question. "I'm Marshal Evans. I was sent by Judge Whitaker to begin a formal investigation. I need you to tell me everything." They sat in the parlor, the room that had once felt like a shrine to a ghost. Now it felt like a courtroom. Anna sat stiffly on the settee, her hands clenched in her lap. Jacob sat beside her, a silent, solid presence. He reached over and took her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her knuckles. She took a deep breath. "I was 17, she began, and the story poured out of her. Not just the story of Emily, but everything. Victor's manipulations, his casual cruelty, the way he charmed their father and isolated her. She told him about the ledgers she'd seen as a girl working in her father's office, the small discrepancies that grew into gaping holes. Missing money, fake entries for supply orders that never arrived, she explained. When I pointed them out, Victor would just laugh. He told my father I had an overactive imagination." Marshal Evans nodded, scribbling furiously in his notebook. "Go on." "Then Emily came into our lives. She was so sweet, so full of trust. Victor saw her as a pawn, a way to secure a business merger with her father. I tried to warn her subtly, but she was in love. She believed he meant to marry her." Anna swallowed, the memory still raw. The night before her family left, I found her in the garden crying. She wouldn't tell me what happened, but I saw the bruises on her wrist shaped like fingers. The next morning, they were gone. Her father forfeited a massive deposit to break the business contract. He just wanted to get his daughter away. She paused, taking a shaky breath. I tried to tell my father, but Victor got there first. He painted me as a jealous, hysterical liar. And my father, who saw Victor as the son he always wanted, he believed him. "And the financial matters," the marshal prompted. "Victor forged land deals. He created shell companies to move money. I recognized the names on the incorporation papers. They were names of clerks and stable hands, people who would have no idea their names were being used to defraud my father of his fortune. And the charges he filed against you? The theft? All lies," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "He created the story to discredit me, to destroy me. He bought those witnesses. That's how he works. He doesn't use a gun if a lie will do the job better." The marshal finished writing, then looked up, his eyes sharp and assessing. He looked at her, then at Jacob's hand holding hers, at the fierce, protective set of his jaw. "I believe you, Miss Harlow." Anna blinked, the simple words hitting her with the force of a physical blow. "We've already discredited 2 of his witnesses," the marshal continued. "They confessed to taking money from a man fitting Victor's description. And Judge Whitaker, he located the Rollins family. They moved 2 territories away to escape the shame. It turns out Emily didn't just have bruises. She died 6 months later of internal injuries her doctor said were consistent with a violent assault. Her family was too scared and too ashamed to speak up. Until now. Anna's breath shook, a ragged, broken sound. All these years, she'd thought Emily had just been hurt, but Victor had killed her. Effective immediately, Marshal Evans said, his voice firm, all charges against you are dropped. Victor Harlow is now a wanted man for fraud, obstruction of justice, and possibly more. We'll find him. Tears streamed down her face, not of fear or sadness, but of pure, unadulterated release. Jacob hadn't let go of her hand once. As the marshal left, promising to be in touch, a profound quiet settled over the house. Jacob remained by her side. I didn't think this day would ever come, Anna said softly, her voice thick. You earned it, he replied. You fought for it. I couldn't have done it alone. She turned to him then, her eyes searching his. You never asked me to explain myself. You never once made me feel like I had to prove I was telling the truth. He reached out his free hand and gently touched her cheek, his rough fingers brushing away a tear. I see you, Anna. Not who they say you are. Not the ghost of your past. Just you. Outside, the wind stirred, a gentle whisper through the pines. But inside the house, the silence no longer felt heavy with secrets or grief. It felt peaceful. Anna leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand still held firmly in his. The past hadn't disappeared. Victor was still out there. But for the first time, she felt anchored. She wasn't a runaway anymore. She was standing her ground, and she wasn't standing alone. The sun rose brighter the next morning, casting a warm golden light over the snow-dusted fields. The birds had returned, their songs a cheerful, riotous declaration that the long winter was finally breaking. The chill that had gripped the land for weeks began to ease, and for the first time in a long, long while, Anna Harlow felt the air in her lungs belonged solely to her. The past hadn't vanished. The warrant for Victor's arrest was a shadow that still stretched across the territory, but it no longer held her hostage. Jacob stood on the porch, a mug of coffee in his hand, his injured arm now in a proper sling. When Anna stepped outside, he turned to her with a soft smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. You slept, he said. For the first time in days, she replied, breathing in the crisp, clean air. Really slept. They stood in a comfortable silence, watching the sky shift from pale amber to a brilliant cloudless blue. The world felt new, clean. Jacob set down his mug on the porch rail. I've been thinking, he said, his voice serious, about everything we've faced and about what comes next. Anna held her breath, her heart giving a sudden, nervous flutter. I built this ranch to last, he said, his gaze fixed on the horizon, on the mountains that had witnessed so much. I built it for a family, for a future I didn't think I'd ever have again. After Laura, he trailed off, then turned to face her. But then you came. You walked out of that storm and into this house, and you filled a silence I didn't even realize was deafening. He took a step closer, his gray eyes full of a raw, beautiful emotion that made her chest ache. You showed me what strength really is, Anna. It's not about being unbreakable. It's about being broken and still having the courage to fight, to trust, to love. He reached into his coat pocket, and then he knelt. Not with a flourish, but with a quiet, solemn grace. He knelt on the wooden planks of the porch, oblivious to the morning chill. He held out a simple silver band. It wasn't new or shiny. It was braided, worn, honest. It looked like it had its own story. Anna Harlow, he said, his voice thick with emotion, will you marry me? Her heart surged, a powerful, overwhelming wave of joy. Once she had been ready to trade her dignity for a little warmth in a dingy saloon. She had walked through snow and shame with only her own stubborn grit to keep her upright. Now this man, this good, strong, scarred man, was kneeling before her, not to save her because he knew she had already saved herself, but because he saw her. He saw her strength, her flaws, her history, and he wanted all of it. Yes, she whispered, the word a prayer. Then firmer, tears of joy streaming down her face. Yes, Jacob Thornton, Yes. He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms, and the embrace wasn't desperate or needy. It was grounding. It was real. It was home. A week later, a letter arrived. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable, precise, formal, a bit cold. Her father's hand. She held it for a long moment, her heart pounding a nervous rhythm against her ribs, before finally breaking the seal. My dearest Anna, I write this with more shame than a father should ever have to carry. Marshall Evans came to see me last week. He showed me everything. The ledgers, the testimony from the Rollins family, the proof of Victor's lies, his crimes, and the terrible pain I caused you by choosing to believe the wrong child. I have no excuse. I was a fool, blinded by pride and by the son I wanted Victor to be, instead of seeing the daughter I already had. I should have listened to you. I should have looked beyond my own arrogance. I failed you in every way a father can fail his child. I have disowned Victor. The authorities will find him. My fortune will be used to see that he pays for his crimes and to provide for the families he has ruined. If you can ever find it in your heart to forgive a foolish old man, I would like to see you again. Not to bring you home, but simply to know the remarkable woman you have become. I will not interfere in your life. I only hope it is one of peace and love. You have earned it. Your father, Nathaniel Harlow. Tears blurred her vision as she read the letter a second, then a third time. Jacob found her in the parlor, holding the letter against her chest. He wrote, she said, her voice choked with a decade of unshed grief and a dawning sense of release. He finally sees. Jacob took the letter, read it quietly, and then gently placed it on the mantel, right beside the photograph of Laura. Two parts of two different lives, finally at peace in the same house. You can go to him, you know, he said softly. She looked at the ring on her finger, then up at his face. I don't want to leave, not now. She smiled, a real radiant smile. But maybe one day, for a visit. When you do, he said, his arm wrapping around her, you won't go alone. Spring bloomed across the land in earnest. The last of the snow melted away, and the fields turned a vibrant, hopeful green. Birds nested in the eaves of the barn. The ranch, once a place of solitude and grief, came alive again. Anna and Jacob worked side by side, mending fences, planting a vegetable garden, repainting the porch. They laughed easily. They made plans without fear. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in streaks of pink and lavender, they stood on that same porch together, watching the light fade. Anna leaned into Jacob's side, his arm warm and solid around her shoulders. Do you ever wonder, she asked quietly, what would have happened if I'd gone with Amos Kane that night, or with Victor? Jacob was silent for a moment, contemplating the vast, darkening landscape. I think the snow still would have fallen, he said finally, and the wind still would have howled, but this porch would be empty, and I'd still be in here, waiting for something I didn't even know I needed. Anna smiled, her eyes on the horizon where the first stars were beginning to appear. This place, she said, her voice full of a quiet wonder, it's more than just shelter. It's home. They stood together as the last light faded beyond the hills. Two souls who had been forged in the harshest of winters, now ready for a new season. The storm had passed, and in its place grew hope, a new beginning, and a life together. From the biting winds of winter to the soft promise of spring, Anna and Jacob found what many people spend a lifetime searching for. A love built not on perfection, but on truth. Not on escaping the past, but on building a future. In a land where storms never asked permission and the past never fully let go, they chose each other anyway. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to run, it's to stay. If this story of courage and redemption moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We bring you timeless tales of love, loss, and the untamable heart of the American frontier every week. What do you think Jacob saw in Anna that first night? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to hit that bell so you never miss a story where the bullets might have missed, but the heart never did.